say, I love you, Dad,
Right.
or read to me. Obviously, they get older,
Right.
things change, and all of a sudden there's this, your child becomes a mystery man to you. How does that affect relationships?
Sure.
What do you work with there?
Sure. Marriage and family therapists see teenagers in the context of the family all the time. And just because your teenager or your youngster was loving you, cuddling with you on the couch one minute, and the next time they want to spend time with their friends or just go in their room and be alone, you can't freak out because that's developmentally normal, as we transition into pre-adolescence and our teenage years to want to get your identity from your peer group rather than your family. So what marriage and family therapists do, they give those parents and those worried moms and dads a psychoeducation so they don't freak out. That being said, good parents, no matter how old their children are, they learn to adapt to these stages of parenting. So parents that get some insight into their teen's world, generally they don't worry as much. It's when the teen completely shuts down, parents start to catastrophize and they don't know what's going on. So I think the goal is to look for these teachable moments, to meet your son or daughter where they're at, especially in their teenage years, but don't push on them too much. If you push on them too much, they're going to shut down.
Facebook and Twitter and all the other social networks have changed everything here. Should moms and dads be reading their kids' tweets?
Yeah, some parents, they'll come in with it's better if you start with the expectation ahead of time. So some parents, you turn 13 or 14, whatever is the earliest permissible age to have a Facebook or a Twitter account. And the parents say, okay, you can have this, but just so you know, you got to be transparent. I need access. I need your password. Or things are lied. It's always easier probably to start out that way. However, lots of parents get again, worried or tipped off because they read things on the Facebook or Twitter or they take it out.
Yeah, because a lot of 12-year-olds will put on their Facebook page, I'm married to such and such. Kids use those expressions,
right?
And they'll find some girl at school and say, we're married.
Right.
They do all that stuff, and parents can kind of go, what?
Right. And I think the rule of thumb is when we're working with families is, if you have a Facebook, mom and dad either need to have access to that or when they ask you about it, you got to be non-defensive and you got to be able to explain that generational gap, like you give an example of being married.
That's what they do. Dr. Eli Karam's in the studio. Sit tight. We're going to talk about the rioters in London and what goes awry with people that are running like wild animals in the streets. With Dr. Eli Karam, marriage and family therapist. We're back with that in about 8 minutes or so. But coming next is... Sure, the last space shuttle came home, but we still have voices in space. At 5:10 today, I have an astronomer rolling into the studio. Tell you about some of the activities still going on in space. If you love space, be here 5:10 today. Dr. Eli's in the studio with me now. Dr. Eli Karam, a marriage and family therapist from U of L's Kent School of Social Work. Good to see you again, brother man.
It's good to be here.
We've all been watching the last couple of days riotous activity overseas, and actually in Philadelphia they've been having these flash mobs where kids go banding together and then rolling through parks and whatever and punching people. And we actually had an incident like that several months ago here in Louisville down near Waterfront Park, where bands were rolling together. The bottom line is, what are we talking about here? Teenagers that have lost, or most of them are teenagers. Some are in their 20s, it appears. But people, what do? They use the anonymity of the crowd, and then they just, some animal-like tendencies are coming out of them?
Yeah, and certainly if something like that can happen in London, it can happen in United States, even Louisville, Kentucky. I think it's this groupthink mentality, and once you are in a crowd, these kind of social psychological principles of lowering your inhibitions, kind of groupthink takes over, and then when it's broadcast like it is in London in the media and on TV, it's kind of like monkey see, monkey do. So this kind of social contagion effect. And I even saw where people now, we mentioned social media in that last segment, people using their Twitter, rival gangs in London were using their Twitter and the Facebook to tip each other off and plan events and scope out locations. So it really is a product of all these societal factors and systemic causes. But I think also, teenagers, they get bored, and when they're bored and there's no structure, a lot of times they get themselves into trouble, especially in groups.
A lot of people are weighing in saying it's the desperation of these times, the crushing recession, the lack of feeling like there's an opportunity out there for a young person who's maybe even out of school or didn't finish school or whatever to accelerate through life when they see people in Mercedes rolling by or whatever. And so they feel like the only retaliation they have is to smash windows.
That's right. We're in a material world, and I want mine, and I want mine now. And then they see it being done, and they see how easy it is, and it's hard to resist those material possessions. Obviously, we know it doesn't make it right. But again, I think with the exposure to this lowers the inhibitions, and when you feel like you've been wronged, if you're an angry teenager anyway, it's easy to justify and rationalize your behavior, especially you're in a group of other people doing it with you.
A British writer yesterday put out these words. They, talking about the writers, are an absolute dead weight upon society because they contribute nothing, yet cost the taxpayer billions. Some hold that they are victims because society has failed to provide them with opportunities to develop their potential. Most of us would say this is nonsense. Rather, they are the victims of a perverted social ethos which elevates personal freedom to an absolute and denies the underclass the discipline, tough love, which alone might enable some of its members to escape the swamp of dependency in which they live.
Tough love. I mean, that's some parents we work with, say, oh, I can't, it's being too tough on him, being too tough on him. But we find out, when you have a tough teen, shifting into how you parent a tough teen, you have to have a bottom line, and you cannot let them. You can't give consequences. You can't give a punishment that's not enforceable, Terry. 100% of the time, people say, "Well, I can't. I got to let him do it because he gets so out of control," or well, they don't have a good consequence. So
I'm afraid of him. What about a parent that says I'm physically afraid of my 18-year-old?
That's right. And teenagers aren't stupid. They understand that level of control, and sometimes they have more control at home around their parent who's either burnt out, under-resourced, or at their wits' end than they do in any other part of their life. So they grasp onto that control. So when you have a consequence, it has to be enforceable. An example, a common one, kids getting ready to go back to school. They've been playing video games all night long, and they're nocturnal, and mom or dad says, you got to go to sleep. You got to get ready for school starting on Monday. And they say, no, I'm going to do what I want. Well, if you can't take the power cord, that's an easy one to take, actually. Take the power cord or have some consequences enforceable 100% of the time. It doesn't work. In fact, the worst consequences parents can give are some that they say, okay, only some of the time they enforce. Because that sends the message, the partial reinforcement says the message to the teenager that, if I just push you long enough, or if I cause enough tension with you and dad, you're going to cave in to what I want. So it is really a skill in only laying the consequence down there if you can enforce it. And
all right, that aside, though, the discipline, the rules making, and the parameters.
Right.
How do you reason with someone? Let's say you're the parent of a teenager that you think is starting to head in the direction they're hanging around with different people with these separatist-like attitudes. How do you reason with your child that that's a bad idea and is going to lead to a life of misery if you go off and believe in people that want to destroy the infrastructure?
Right. And I think what parents do a lot of times is when they even have a sense that their teen is starting to hang out with the wrong crowd, they immediately, before asking questions, jump in and take a defensive stance, which just serves to polarize them from their son or daughter. So the more the more they say, the parent says, you can't hang out with that person, the more the kid wants to do it. So instead of jumping to that conclusion, I think it's important to understand, I can say it, being curious about your son or daughter. Because the son or daughter you think you might know through these teenage years and gaining identity through their peer group, you might not know everything that's going through their head. So you want to listen to them. You want to understand what about that group they gravitate towards. So you want to be curious, kind of meet them where they're at, and then kind of once you've gotten in there, once you've given the stroke, as I say, then can kind of provide the kick of after you listen, after you understand what's important to your son or daughter, then join with them and try to make it a teachable moment. But there's obviously some areas, I'm not saying let your kid run amok. If your child is in danger to themselves or with a group and putting drugs, alcohol, something like that, you got to jump in. You got to be proactive. But most parents lose these teachable moments with their kids because they take a preemptive stance and they don't hear their son or daughter out, and then they lose that point of connection. So you got to let your son or daughter talk. You got to meet them where they're at before you kind of jump in.
Even if you know they're wrong because you've already lived 30 years longer than they have, and they're making a foolish mistake.
Well, at the end of the day, again, if you're consistent in your consequences and you can enforce it, it's your house. So you can hear them out, and still they have to follow the rules in the house. I think some parents just say, well, if I let them talk, I'm automatically going to lose my power. And I say, no. I mean, it can be a both and. You can have a firm rule and a consequence and hear your son or daughter out. So you can kind of teach them to be autonomous, to be critical thinkers at the same time, have them adhere to the rules of the house. And I often say parents, hopefully you have a co-parent, but if you don't, you can still do this, but at the end of the day, you can't let anybody, if you're on the same page with your co-parent, or maybe you have a family member that's helping you raise the family, as we often see a lot too in marriage and family therapy, you got to be unified with that co-parent, because teenagers, kids, they're very good at coming in there. If they can detour the heat, if they can cause a problem with mom and dad, they can get out of the consequence. So you got to be unified with your co-parent.
You coaches have a coaches meeting first, and then you dispense your wisdom. All right, exactly. Eli, good to talk to you again. EliKaram.com is his website. The last name is spelled Karam. Marriage and family therapist. Good to talk to you. Back in a moment on 84 WHA.